Broadcasting live from an Airstream somewhere in Tornado Alley, bringing you the people, places, and stories from the Panhandle to the Red River. This is your Only in Oklahoma show.
Well, it's happened, folks. We are finally doing what we've said we were going to do in the intro to the show. We are headed to the Panhandle, to the No Man's Land Museum. I'm Brett.
And I am Harley.
You know, not often does art imitate life, but I think now the universe is complete. We've done shows down by the Red River, and now we're headed to the Panhandle. I think we're done here. I think
we could just call it a wrap.
We've done it. It's like the 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon.
I don't understand the comparison.
I don't either. I never mind. In tourism, there's this thing. No, there's not. There's actually not. So I was out of state, drawing the ire of you because I was in Texas over the weekend.
Yes.
We're not going to mention specifically, but I got you tanned my hide for making a recommendation, and I'm sorry. I want to apologize to you publicly for making a recommendation that did not. I built it up. I built the buttercup up. That's what I did.
So, yes, I went to a restaurant that you highly recommended, and apparently they have an entire new staff, management, owners, suppliers, because what I got absolutely did not live up to the hype.
Well, here's the problem. You and I have broke bread at many a table, many a diner, pre-COVID, OnlyinOKShow. So I think we know our way around a kitchen, probably too. So we know what we share similar palates.
Yes,
I think we've survived on much less than what you were provided over the weekend. But I will say this: every now and again we get it wrong. I'll admit, I can admit it.
I don't know that I can admit that. I don't feel like I'm ever wrong.
Pride.
I feel like I'm always right. And then sometimes you're right.
Pride cometh before the fall. That's what I was always raised.
And it is fall. It officially.
Is fall. So it is officially fall. So
we're past that. I don't have to worry about it.
We're over it now. I wanted to address the elephant in the room.
You mean the Italian restaurant in the room?
The Italian elephant made of garlic knots that didn't taste like garlic knots. I'm sorry.
No. I've never in my life tasted flavorless bread, so thank you for...
I believe that's called gluten-free.
No, this didn't... Not only was it gluten-free, it was flavor-free. I don't know how you make bread with absolutely no flavor. It was like saltines without salt have more flavor than this bread, so...
I don't know. I think there is a way, but it's called a communion host. I ate plenty of those growing up. But, well, speaking of other things that probably don't have flavor, we get to talk about mastodon and megalodon and arrowheads coming up with Seth from the No Man's Land Museum after this. So, Harley, I found out via the internet that your 14-year-old son is playing soccer and has been playing soccer for a couple months now?
A month.
And
couple of weeks,
and they've got a fundraiser coming up for probably uniforms.
Yes, they absolutely do need uniforms, and I'm sure that is one of the things that they're raising funds for.
Well, I kind of feel like by now we have an en route to uniforms, quality uniforms, and that would be Master Threads.
If you need uniforms or popular promotional items for your companies, groups, or sports teams, I can't think of anybody better than Master Threads to fill that order.
No, I can't either. And you can actually call for a free quote and find out just exactly what it's going to cost you, how many rolls of sausages do you have to sell to get your jersey. Now, you can do that by calling them at 405-673-3787. That's 405-673-3787.
Or you could check out their website, masterthreads.us.
That's Master Threads. If you're like me, you've never been to the Panhandle. You thought it was no man's land, but did you know there's a museum called the No Man's Land Museum? Yes, there is. And today, Seth Hammond, the curator, is here to tell us all about it. Seth, welcome to the show.
Hey, guys. Thanks for having me on. Hope y'all are having a good evening.
A no man's land museum. I mean, I don't think you could pick a better name in a name generator than the No Man's Land Museum in the Panhandle. But first, let's talk a little bit about, I think a lot of people are unsure why we have a Panhandle. What is the Panhandle? Can you give us a little bit of a history lesson there?
The reason that Oklahoma got a Panhandle stuck onto it, the 30-second version of it, is something along these lines that after Texas, New Mexico, Colorado, and Kansas had all drawn up all of their boundaries, this little bit of land out here in the western part of Oklahoma was left over. And so in 1890, it was sort of welded on to the territory of Oklahoma. You know, some historians will refer to us as basically a pocket frontier. I mean, before the Red River Wars in the 1870s, 1874, this land was largely, it was not open to any European settlement, there were no permanent European settlements here because this was all part of Comanche area. So what was here was Comanche running back and forth across the southern plains, and their allied tribes like the Kiowa, the Southern Cheyenne, the Plains Apache, those kinds of, the Southern Arapaho, those tribes. And so you ended up just with a little strip of land out here that was variously called sometimes things like the Neutral Strip or No Man's Land, because legally it was just territory that no one could own at that time, up until the late 1880s, up until 1890, really. And so about 1888, what really got the Panhandle sort of put on to Oklahoma was an event called the Haymeadow Massacre. Is this something you've heard of?
No, I haven't.
Okay. So the Haymeadow Massacre is the result of some of those tensions left over from Bleeding Kansas from the 1850s.
Now, what is Bleeding Kansas?
So Bleeding Kansas in the 1840s, 1850s, this involves people you've heard of like John Brown. Okay. Kansas is really proud of John Brown. I lived in Kansas for a while, too. So Kansas is, if you go to the state capital at Topeka, there's a huge mural of John Brown, and it's almost deity-like. He's standing and he's got a Bible in one hand and a rifle in the other, and he's got this long white flowing beard. There's a tornado behind him, kind of pulling his beard back into this tornado. I've had, friends from Kansas before, and John Brown's a big deal. Kansas was, of course, a territory that was land that was trying to be occupied by the Free Soilers and the Abolitionists. Free Soilers who thought that if you could stop slavery from spreading into the new territories in the west, in the central and western parts of the country at that time, and the Abolitionists, of course, that slavery would die a natural death, and the Abolitionists then that wanted to end slavery outright. And so Kansas became a battleground between groups like that and a battleground between, of course, people from Missouri and slaveholding territories that wanted to try to bring Kansas in as a slaveholding territory and ultimately a slaveholding state. Things got very bitter. Things came to shooting matches in many cases. So those divisions, even 30 years on after the Civil War, and after, they ran deep. To me, when I read these stories, I can't imagine that couldn't have played some role in some of these divisions that were going on. But the nearest court that had any jurisdiction over this area was in Paris, Texas, which is in kind of east central Texas.
I'd recently read an article about a national park where there's an area in the park where technically you could get away with murder because the jurisdictions don't actually work for who would investigate a murder versus the townships and counties and federal jurisdiction in the area. Is this a similar situation where it's covered technically, but you kind of get away with whatever you wanted because nobody really had jurisdiction?
Yeah, it's difficult because the nearest court that had jurisdiction was in Texas and was in east central Texas.
That's a hell of a 911 wait.
Exactly.
Were there settlers in the area at the time?
There were settlers in the area. How legal it was and how illegal it was, I think, is up in the air. There was nothing really stopping them at the time, and we have records of post offices here at the museum that, that go back to the 1880s. The first permanent post office was established. There's going to be someone who's going to crinkle their nose when I say this, but I'm pretty sure the first permanent post office that was established here was in Beaver County, which is east of here, in the eastern part of the Panhandle, and that happened in 1883. It was an area that was, a lot of people were moving through the area on cattle drives. I mean, it was kind of one of the later remnants of the Wild West. So what was moving most, there were a lot of cowboys moving through here. There was another little town up near the Kansas line again that was called Beer City, and it earned its name. It was just a tent city where there were just railroad workers and cowboys and so on, and there were, and several brothels apparently too, by the accounts that have been left behind. There were few permanent settlements, and there was oftentimes a lot of disputes and no way to settle those disputes. So ultimately, I guess to bring my story to the conclusion, it was decided that something was going to have to be done with this land. And really, like I said, after all of those other borders had sort of been established, especially our Kansas and Texas were already states. They weren't going to take any new territory. And New Mexico and Colorado had already established, New Mexico Territory had established its eastern boundary at the 103rd meridian, and Colorado, it would be really strange to try to add it to Colorado, jutting out of Colorado down into the east, so it just kind of seemed, I think, to make a lot of sense to just add it to the Oklahoma Territory, and so that's what happened on May 2nd, 1890. And if you ever come up here to Guyman, we have that Pioneer Days that we do the first weekend in May every year, and that's what that really celebrates. That celebrates us finally sort of having a home, if you will, us being sort of added on to finally having a permanent home. There was talk. I mean, I'm glossing over a lot of things too. There was talk of this being its own state at one time. This was going to be the state of Cimarron, is what this was going to be. Perhaps that was one solution to the problem, that it would just be a state in and of itself. So
how would that compare in size to other states? Are we talking like the size of Maine? No, it's got to be bigger.
Rhode
than
Island,
Maine.
maybe Rhode Island.
Trying to think a good comparison. Well, it's about 168 miles across the Panhandle if you drive across it east to west, and it's 35 miles from the Texas line to the Kansas line. Is about the same size as the island of Puerto Rico. There weren't really ever enough people here, though, to count as a state. That was one of the things that really kept us from being called from really being a state.
Well, I feel like it is, when you think of Wild West, I mean, I don't think you get much wilder than basically a neutral. I mean, that's gunfighter stuff. So, Seth, a lot of history, obviously, and even stuff pre-human.
Oh my gosh, yes.
Yeah. So
that's how I came to museums. Actually, was through. Now you're talking my language, because I came to museums through natural history museums. I used to work at a natural history museum in most of my family's from Western Kansas originally. My parents came down here to go to Oklahoma Panhandle State University, and they became teachers, but they were all from Western Kansas. So I went to graduate school at Fort Hays State University, which is in Hays, Kansas, in Western Kansas, and I studied geology and paleontology.
Seth, you don't believe that the devil planted dinosaur bones to trick us? That's what that.
No. No.
Or they're not made from rocks that have been plastered together. I love dinosaurs. I was once in a 9-year relationship with someone that did not like dinosaurs, hated the Natural History Museum. We lived not far from the Sam Noble. We never went in it. It ended badly. I'm just saying it ended badly. If you don't believe in dinosaurs, you don't believe in me. So, but
the Sam Noble is a good museum, and as a matter of fact, although it can be a bit of a sore spot up here, just because a lot of our paleontological material did wind up at that museum, but also paleontological material from the Oklahoma Panhandle has wound up in some of the biggest museums in the nation. There are collections some of the fossil horses, for example, from the central Panhandle, from near the little town of Optima, which is a couple of towns away from where I am right now. Some of that material ended up at the American Museum of Natural History, and it makes up part of what is called Skinner collection of fossil horses at the American Museum of Natural History. And there's stuff here, the paleontological resources of the Panhandle, if you want to go off on that tangent for a while, they really start not with the dinosaurs, but they actually start with fossil mammals that were found here in Texas County, in sort of east central Texas County. And that starts about the early 1920s. An expedition from the University of California at Berkeley, and also with some guys who had been prospecting. They were oil geologists, actually, is what their day job was. And they were coming up from the Texas Panhandle into this area exploring for potential places to drill for oil. About 1 mile west of the town of Optima right now, they came across some fossil mammal bones. They came across a gomphotherium, which is the best way to explain it, well, gomphotheres are related to modern elephants, stuff like that. So they're a mastodon. They're a big shovel-tusked animal that would have probably been eating soft vegetation on the edge of the river and things like that. They found lots of different kinds of fossil horses, fossil relatives of modern pronghorn, the modern pronghorn that's out here. Point being, they found a diversity of fossil mammals, and that caught the attention of a lot of people, including J. Willis Stovall, who was instrumental in starting that Sam Noble Museum. In fact, last time I was there, I'm sure it's still that way. It's the Stovall Drive, right, that you drive into if you go to the Sam Noble.
It is,
so,
yes.
Yeah, and so J. Willis Stovall, he came out here and he worked with some of those excavations as well. There were several different excavations, of course, people from the museum there in Oklahoma, but also people from Berkeley, people from the American Museum of Natural History, all worked with that stuff. So Stovall was interested then in the history of the ecology and the natural history of this region. Stovall was, and eventually in 1932, somewhere around 1931, 1932, a lot of this stuff was going on too. Some locals, using a road grader out near the town of Kenton, which again is in the very northwest corner of the Panhandle. It's right where Oklahoma, Colorado, and New Mexico all come together, is where it is at. 7 miles east of that town, they were working the road grader. All the roads were dirt at that time. They kicked up a big piece of bone and sent it to Norman, to John Willis Stovall, and lo and behold, he told them, well, this is a piece of dinosaur bone. No one had really found anything out here at this part of the Morrison Formation before. And so Stovall came out, started excavations, and those excavations went through all of the 30s up until about 1942, and then the funding was cut from a lot of this was WPA work, Works Progress Administration, because this was during the Dust Bowl, right? This is during the Great Depression. But at that time, as World War II was kicking up, the funding for those kinds of projects dried up because everything was, of course, being turned into the war effort. Anyway, that's where all those dinosaurs come from. And as a matter of fact, our state fossil, right? The state fossil of Oklahoma is Ceraphagonix maximus. Basically what it would mean in Latin is largest eater of the saurians, or the reptiles, is the literal translation of that term. But this is an animal that was nearly the size of T-Rex, the largest known allosaur. And that it's our state fossil. This is all from the Morrison Formation, which dominates a lot of the western United States and is produced more dinosaurs in the United States than any geological formation, certainly in North America. So what's in northwestern Cimarron County, the Morrison Formation, is the same thing as Dinosaur National Monument in Utah. It's the same geological unit.
You have an entire room dedicated at the museum to exhibits that cover geology and paleontology, right?
Yes. We have paleontology. The geology and paleontology is part of our museum's mission statement, to preserve those kinds of things. So yes, we have dinosaur tracks from the area, the Black Mesa area. We have the classic kinds of things, I guess, you might see in a natural history collection at most museums. You know, we have mammoths and mastodons and all those kinds of things as well, because all of that stuff, there was a whole prehistory before even any human beings here to talk about. So the oldest rocks in the Panhandle really are more in southeastern Texas County and into Beaver County and places like that. That's where you get into, it looks more like, I guess, you know, you talk about the red dirt in Oklahoma, and that's when you get into like Beaver County, the eastern part of the Panhandle, it really starts to look more like that. And that's all Permian. Part of the same stuff that makes up the Glass Mountains in near Enid. It's the same age of rocks. That stuff is from about 250 million years ago, roughly, right in that area. Those are the oldest rocks in the Oklahoma Panhandle. Then you have all that stuff from the age of dinosaurs in western Cimarron County, out on the western edge of the Panhandle. And then it goes right up to, all the way down to the Ice Age, down to the Pleistocene, the last couple of million years. Most of that stuff is going to be found in, you know, alluvium around the riverbanks and stuff like that, is where you're going to find the mammoths.
So, Seth,
things like that.
Speaking of things that are found,
yes,
tell us what we can give us the virtual tour of the No Man's Land, because I just kind of looking down the list, it covers everything from paleo to cowboys to Indians to arrowheads. Can you give us of the virtual tour of the museum?
We start them kind of back here in our room where we have our Paleo-Indian collections and then our paleontology collection, just because those are the oldest things in museums. We try to get people to start there, kind of where you start chronologically. And we have, for instance, here we have the Baker collection, which is pretty well known amongst anthropologists and archaeologists. It's a pretty well-known collection of spear points and arrowheads and those kind of things that goes back to 10 or 12,000 years, getting near, I gotta be really careful how I say this, but it's getting near, right, to some of the first human habitation in North America. Some of those kind of things are. We're talking, 10, 12,000 years ago. Clovis points are the oldest sort of style of flint point that you find in North America. And then we have, a lot of evidence of the early human habitation back here. We have sandals that came from Cimarron County that have been radiocarbon dated to nearly 10,000 years. Some of the stuff from the Kenton Caves, the human stuff, is dating now to about 10,000 years. That's getting up there. Like I said, some of the oldest stuff in North America is around 15,000, 16,000 years right now. So that's where we try to have people start. We have quite a bit of history of the university, and that can actually give us a chance to lead into the history of the museum itself and the historical society and so on. So we have a lot of artifacts from the early time of the university here, Oklahoma Panhandle State University. But usually our biggest draw, in fact, I have people all the time who come in and really the only thing they want to see is our Dust Bowl exhibit. We have a lot of photographs and so on of the Dust Bowl, and that was a big thing. Ken Burns did a documentary on the Dust Bowl and did some research here in this museum. That's another big thing that people come here to see is the Dust Bowl. That was a big impact on our area and, of course, on Oklahoma in general. It had changed sort of a lot of the ways we think about how we should farm, and especially farming in semi-arid climate. How exactly should you go about doing that? Because obviously what we were doing up to that point wasn't working. And people should have known, right, that there were histories, I guess, of drought. Even though there had been 10 or 12 or 15 pretty good years now for a while, we know that drought is a regular feature of the Great Plains of the United States, right? We know that droughts are going to come sooner or later, and that some of them can last for a very long time. There are records from eastern Kansas of dust storms rolling off the western plains of Kansas. For most of the post-Civil War period, most of the Great Plains of the United States was just put on, there were maps that just showed it as the Great American Desert. We knew that drought was a feature out here, but after World War I, and really through World War I, what Washington wanted was wheat. They wanted wheat because they needed wheat to win the war. They needed wheat to feed the soldiers. So there was a lot of incentive at that time to plow up a lot of land, and there was not a whole lot of thought given to whether that land was going to be able to sustain agriculture for a long period of time. You know, how erodible is that land? No one really thought about how to conserve the soil. It was just a matter at that time of trying to get wheat, and wheat prices went up, and people plowed up more land. As long as the rain was coming, they kind of got away with it. In the early 30s, as economic hardship hit and as drought settled across the Great Plains of the United States, all of that land that had been plowed up, it had nothing to hold it. It had no crops to hold it. It had none of the natural grasses to hold it. And so when the ever-present winds across the southern Great Plains of the United States kicked up, it just all took to the air, and it choked people out. My grandparents were all affected by this on both sides of my family. I remember my grandpa, my maternal grandfather, telling me that the dirt would get so thick, matted in the backs of their cattle, that the weeds would sprout on the backs of their cattle as they were just out in the corrals. And, of course, all the, kind of the typical things you hear, most of my family's Dust Bowl stories seem to be pretty typical.
Right.
My grandpa used to talk about how his mom, when she'd set the table, she'd turn all the glasses and plates over, because if you didn't do that, if you didn't turn the glasses and turn them all over, they'd just be full of fine, you could feel it gritting in your teeth because of the fine dirt that would just come through the windows, and that, that they would try to, hang up wet sheets and so on, hang them over the windows, hang them over the doors to try to catch the dirt. So yeah, that's a big part of our history as well, right? The Dust Bowl was the Oklahoma Panhandle. Of course, some people left. It was really difficult times, a lot of depressing memories for a lot of people. So,
did the Dust Bowl, could it create anomalies? Is that how we got a two-headed calf? Was it the Dust Bowl?
Okay, so the two-headed calf. The two-headed calf is the very first exhibit here at our museum. That's the history of the museum itself.
Mm-hmm.
And to answer your question, no, the Dust Bowl was not a cause of any anomalies that I'm aware of. That's genetics. I've heard different agricultural professors tell me that it can be the result of a little too much inbreeding in your cattle herd. It is about 1%, actually, somewhere between about 0.5% and 1% of live births are actually two-headed cattle. But the two-headed calf has a story in and of itself. There used to be, on the campus here at OPSU, one of the classes they used to teach was a taxidermy class here at the university. And so for the beginning of the museum's grand opening, one of the things they wanted was to have that two-headed calf ready to be in here. So they did some of the students and their professor did kind of a rush job on trying to get the two-headed calf get it prepared and have it ready for the opening of the museum. One of the chemicals that they used at the time is quicklime, calcium oxide. And calcium oxide, if you get it wet, it oxidizes, and that creates a lot of heat. And so when they had put all of the material in there, the straw, the stuffing, to fill this two-headed calf up, right, to stuff it, so they had not got the carcass dried quite properly, quite yet, and the moisture caused a reaction with that quicklime and started it on fire.
Oh, wow.
So they had to rip it open real fast and drag all that burning stuffing out as fast as they could before they lost the mount. Obviously, they managed to save it because we have it now. Yeah, that was the very first exhibit here at the museum. The museum itself, the No Man's Land Museum, started out as the museum club on the Oklahoma Panhandle State University campus. There were a lot of professors of geology had brought in a lot of interesting rocks and fossils. There were people that had interest in archaeology, and of course by that time there were people who'd come from prominent area families that wanted to leave grandpa's old desk or something like that, right? So it was decided they needed a museum. So they started, like I said, the museum club on campus, and it started in Sewell with Burrell Hall, which is on the OPSU campus. They had a lot of stuff about local wildlife initially because they had a taxidermy class, so we have a lot of, kind of original mounts from that. Eventually, then it came around to starting the No Man's Land Historical Society, which is who runs the museum now. The No Man's Land Historical Society was started in the fall, October 3rd of 1934, to preserve the natural history and the history of the Oklahoma Panhandle. And the museum has been grown since then. We've had most of the building that the museum is in now came along in 1950, and then there were some major add-ons in the 70s, and our most recent addition then came around 2012, 2013. We added the new wing where our Dust Bowl exhibit and a lot of the agricultural history and things like that are at. For a small historical society, it really punches above its weight. The No Man's Land Historical Society does. We have put together a pretty nice little museum out here.
Seth, it's October and everybody's got something spooky going on. And going through the information about your museum, I came across something that I think really applies. Can you tell us about your horse-drawn hearse exhibit?
Yeah. That has an interesting story behind it too. We have an old horse-drawn hearse that we decorate up. The museum has at different times we have employed student workers. So one of the things that, as college students are wont to do, apparently there were some visitors in the museum one time, and those guys decided that it would be really funny if they crawled in that hearse. Right, and got inside. There's a casket inside that hearse. And one of them decided it would be just hilarious if he got in there and crawled in that casket and scared those visitors. Apparently, I guess he lifted the lid up off it and started coming out of it or something, and evidently those people just bolted. They just evidently left the museum very quickly.
The claustrophobia would probably be the one thing that did me in, but I am always quasi-curious about, I love to look at the post-mortem photographs, the Victorian post-mortem photographs. I think that whole historical significance is interesting to me. I also like the predated coffins and hearse wagons. I love that kind of stuff, but I really don't think I could probably stay inside of one. That is all, really. Yeah, we do, Halloween. Actually, that's a good chance for us to plug ourselves. We are trying to, weather permitting, hold it outdoors because, obviously, of coronavirus concerns. But we do want to still have our some spooky storytellers on Halloween that come to our museum as well. Fun. Yeah.
So we're trying to do that. Still trying to hopefully be able to do that on Halloween this year. Have some people that really do a really good job telling some stories here at the museum. So, yeah, it's a chance to throw in a shameless plug, too, for some events we've got trying to come up.
Heading in that direction, with everything being altered because of COVID, the fact that you're still trying to have some things that are interactive, still kind of bridging those gaps and not necessarily pretending it's not there, but trying to do as business as usual as possible. And with that being said, what are some of the other things that you have coming up in the next couple months that people may be interested in that may not be aware that's happening? Yeah, well, that's our biggest thing that we usually do. We do our Nightmare at the Museum. Like I said, on Halloween, we're trying to do the Halloween thing, like I said, weather permitting. We're trying to do that outside because we feel like everything the CDC recommendations and so on says that's better than inside. Absolutely. So, where can people find out for sure? Because everything's kind of, it's almost, we've gone from day to day to kind of week to week, month to month. Where can people go? Where is your clearinghouse for information for people so they know exactly what you're doing, when you're doing it, and to kind of have a finger on the pulse out there? Sure. We have a website for the No Man's Land Museum, which is at nmlhs.org, and that will take you to the website. You can send me an email at nmlhs
at outlook.com, and I can let you know, whenever things get back on our more regular schedule.
Absolutely.
And you can always call the museum here at 580-349-2670. And also, our normal business hours are from Tuesday through Saturday from 10 until noon and then 1 until 4. Those are our normal business hours.
Well, Seth, again, keep doing what you're doing. I mean, there's so much that people are missing out on and so many things that can be learned here. I think history is definitely, I don't know what the storytellers will say in 100 years about at least this year, but thank you for the history lesson. Most importantly, I think there's a lot of people that didn't know what that little strip meant up there. They just see it on the weather like I do. So again, thank you for taking the time to go on the show. In all seriousness, keep telling the tales and spreading the history.
If you find yourself out in the Panhandle, find yourself in Goodwell, definitely stop on by. I do appreciate you guys thinking of it.
So, I love history. Specifically, I really like Oklahoma history, or I thought I did. I also like natural history, but wow, what an education I do not have. I am not learned in the ways of history that I thought. I like Western movies. Western history, it's vast. It's a vast landscape.
Let's be honest, Seth just skimmed the surface of the history that is involved in that one portion
of the state. Well, and if you get him started on Bleeding Kansas, it's a whole other show.
No, I feel like a trip to No Man's Land Museum is going to be super educational. Obviously, you've got Seth there to walk you through the history and answer questions for you. There's a lot. There are layers.
Layers and layers and two-headed calf. What else? What else do you need? Oh, I don't know. A horse-drawn hearse? Hello? I'll crawl in there for $1. Okay, it's going to be like $5. But I would do it. There's a lot to be learned, a lot to be said about museums that are still open, still available. All it takes is for you to get your ass into the car and go.
Again, though, I think this is something we need to point out in the current environment. Be sure to double check.
Yes.
Before driving all the way to the Panhandle.
Right.
To go to a museum, be sure to double check with whatever destination you're going to. Be sure to double check, make sure that they're going to be open during the time that you're going to be there. The No Man's Land Museum does have limited hours right now, 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. with an hour off for lunch, Tuesday through Saturday.
There are so many places to kind of, even if you're not going to the Panhandle, there's a ton of places you can cruise around. It's fall. Leaves are falling right now.
Yeah, I think you and I and the lady folk are all planning a trip.
Do the old Talamina Drive, maybe?
I believe that is in the works.
It is in the works. This just in. We're going on the Talamina Drive, ladies and gentlemen. But honestly, you've seen it in pictures. You definitely want to check it out. Hell, go to Pops. Go anywhere. Get out and go. Don't be. And if you need to take the precautions, take the precautions. Okay? Take a road trip. It's a perfect time of year. It's starting to get a little bit cooler now. It was 90. To be fair, it was 90 degrees today. I almost died. But it's in the morning and nice, crisp mornings now.
It's definitely getting to the perfect road trip weather.
Right. In the environment that we're in right now, get in the car and go. And while you're going, plug us in.
Absolutely. There are over 90 episodes in the back catalog for you to enjoy while you're on your road trips.
And if you stay after the show, there are also episodes that I deal with on a personal level. I have my own episodic breakdown.
Yes. Stick around for the outtakes
Absolutely.
after the, what is that called? After the outro music.
Yeah. The blooper reel, if you will. Remember Cannonball Run?
I loved
the best.
Honestly, that is why we have bloopers at the end of the shows.
And if you're wondered why there's bloopers after the end of anything, that's why. That's the minutia. That's where the heart is. I don't care if you skip to the very end. Subscribe to the show.
Absolutely tell your friends about it. This has been the Only in OK Show. I'm Harley.
I'm Brett.
And we're out of here. Peace.
That's masterthreads.us.
No,
it's not.
that's not what you say. You go, Master Threads.
Oh, that's right.
I don't know why you do it, but you always do it.
Master Threads. Master Threads.
Oh my God, dude.
You ready?
Yes. Facebook Messenger is absolutely
The worst
form of communication on the face of the planet.
Oklahoma Panhandle State University, where the Panhandle lives. Come on.
3, 2, 1, go.